One soldier, one pistol, 7 German attackers dropped in seconds. What happened in the muddy trenches of the Argonne Forest on October 8, 1918, wasn't just a firefight. It was a revelation, a moment so brutal it would rewrite the rules of close-quarters combat forever. Most people know about machine guns and artillery, but almost no one knows about the day America's sidearm became Germany's nightmare. You're about to witness it. The forest was dying. Autumn had stripped the trees bare, leaving skeletal branches clawing at a gray sky. Beneath them, the Argonne Forest had become a graveyard, a twisted maze of shattered timber, shell craters filled with black water, and trenches carved like scars across the French countryside. On that morning, October 8, 1918, the Western Front was about to witness something that would haunt German soldiers for the rest of the war. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain James Mitchell crouched in the forward trench, his hand resting on the grip of his service pistol, the M1911 Colt 45 automatic. 7 rounds of .45 ACP ammunition, each bullet weighing 230 grains, heavy, slow, devastating. Unlike the sleek European pistols that German officers carried, this weapon wasn't designed for elegance. It was designed to stop a man dead in his tracks, no matter how much adrenaline, morphine, or fury was driving him forward. Mitchell ran his thumb along the checkered grip. The metal was cold, still damp from the morning mist. Around him, the trench smelled of wet earth, cordite, and something worse, the sweet rot of bodies that hadn't been recovered from no man's land. He'd been fighting for 16 months, ever since American forces had arrived in France. He'd seen men die in every way war could devise, but today felt different. Today felt like a reckoning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Beyond the American lines, somewhere in the fog-shrouded forest, the Germans were preparing their assault. Intelligence had warned them. Stormtroopers, elite assault infantry trained in infiltration tactics. These weren't conscripts or tired reservists. These were killers, men who specialized in breaking through defensive lines with grenades, flamethrowers, and brutal hand-to-hand combat. Mitchell glanced down the trench line. To his left stood Sergeant Thomas Brennan, a dock worker from Brooklyn with hands like steel vices and a laugh that could cut through artillery fire. Brennan was checking his rifle, but Mitchell knew the real weapon on Brennan's hip, another Colt 45, holstered and ready. To his right was Lieutenant David Cole, barely 23, fresh-faced but with eyes that had seen too much too quickly. Cole had joined the war 6 weeks ago. He'd already killed 3 men with his bayonet and hadn't slept through a night since. "Sir," Cole whispered, his voice tight, "think they'll come at us through the wire?" Mitchell shook his head. "Stormtroopers don't come through the wire. They come under it, around it, through gaps we don't even know exist. When they hit us, it'll be close, pistol range." Cole's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm. He'd fired it once in training, but never in combat. The Colt felt heavy on his hip, almost obscene in its weight compared to the delicate Luger his father had brought back from a dead German officer. "Remember what they taught you," Mitchell said, his voice steady, paternal. "The 45 isn't about accuracy at 50 yards. It's about stopping power at 5. One shot, center mass. The bullet does the rest." The morning of October 8, 1918, had begun with an eerie silence. No artillery, no machine gun fire. Just the wind moving through dead trees and the distant cawing of crows picking at corpses in no man's land. For soldiers who had lived under the constant roar of bombardment, Silence was more terrifying than noise. Silence meant something was coming. In the German trenches, 300 yards away, Lieutenant Hans Krieger prepared his men for the assault. Krieger was a veteran of Verdun, a survivor of the Somme, a man who had watched the old German army bleed itself white against British and French defenses. But Krieger still believed in the superiority of German arms, German training, German will. His men were stormtroopers, hand-picked assault infantry, equipped with stick grenades, trench knives, and MP-18 submachine guns. They wore leather jackets reinforced with metal plates, carried gas masks, and moved with the cold efficiency of men who had done this 100 times before.
"Remember," Krieger told them, his voice hard as iron, "the Americans are not the French. They are not exhausted. They are fresh, well-fed, and eager. But they are also inexperienced. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and they will break." What Krieger didn't know, what none of the German command fully understood, was that the Americans had brought something new to the Western Front. Not a machine gun, not a tank, not a new rifle. They had brought a pistol that redefined what a handgun could do in combat. The Colt 45 had been born from American mistakes. In 1899, during the Philippine-American War, American soldiers had faced Moro warriors, tribal fighters who would charge through rifle fire, high on adrenaline and religious fervor, armed with bladed weapons. The standard-issue .38 caliber revolver had failed catastrophically. Officers emptied their pistols into charging Moros, only to be cut down because the bullets simply didn't have enough stopping power. The lesson was written in blood. A military sidearm needed to drop a man with one shot, even if he was running at full speed, even if he didn't feel pain, even if he refused to die. Enter John Moses Browning, the greatest firearms designer America had ever produced. Browning designed the M1911, chambered for a new cartridge, the .45 ACP. The bullet was massive by pistol standards, subsonic but carrying enormous energy. When it hit flesh, it didn't just punch through. It created a temporary wound cavity so large that it could shut down the central nervous system instantly. Hydrostatic shock, massive tissue damage, immediate incapacitation. By 1918, the Colt 45 had become standard issue for American officers and NCOs. But the weapon's reputation in Europe was still unproven. The British carried Webley revolvers. The French used the elegant but underpowered Ruby pistol. The Germans trusted their Luger P08, a marvel of engineering, accurate and reliable, but firing a 9mm round that lacked the raw stopping power of the .45. Mitchell had carried his Colt through every engagement since arriving in France. He'd used it twice, once to kill a German soldier who'd broken into the trench during a raid, once to finish a wounded man who'd been screaming for hours in no man's land. Both times, one shot had been enough. But today would be different. Today would test the pistol not against isolated targets, but against a coordinated assault by Germany's best killers. At 06:45 hours, the first grenades exploded. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously, exactly as Mitchell had feared. German stormtroopers had infiltrated through the gaps in the wire during the night, moving silently through the fog until they were within throwing distance of the American trenches. Stick grenades tumbled through the air, long wooden handles spinning end over end, fuses hissing. They detonated in sharp cracks, showering the trenches with shrapnel and mud. Men screamed. the smell of high explosive mixed with the iron stench of blood. "Here they come!" Brennan roared. Dark shapes materialized from the fog. German stormtroopers charging forward in small teams, moving with practiced coordination. Some carried MP-18 submachine guns, laying down suppressive fire. Others hurled more grenades. Behind them, riflemen advanced, ready to exploit any breakthrough. Mitchell rose from cover, pistol in hand. The first German was 15 feet away, running hard, MP-18 raised. Mitchell's training took over. Front sight, center mass, squeeze. The Colt roared. The recoil was sharp but manageable, the heavy slide cycling smoothly. The German stormtrooper jerked backward as if he'd hit an invisible wall. The .45 caliber bullet had struck him just below the sternum, the massive slug tearing through his diaphragm and pulverizing his spine. He was dead before he hit the ground. No stumbling, no writhing, just instant collapse. Brennan fired twice, 2 stormtroopers trying to leap into the trench. Both went down hard. Their charge ended in mid-stride. The .45 stopping power was absolute. Cole, wide-eyed and shaking, raised his Colt as a German soldier vaulted over the sandbags directly in front of him. The man was huge, leather coat slick with mud, a trench knife glinting in his hand. Cole fired from the hip, a panicked shot that should have missed, but the range was so close that it didn't matter. The bullet caught the German in the chest. The impact lifted him off his feet and slammed him backward into the mud. His knife clattered uselessly on the duckboards. "Jesus Christ," Cole whispered, staring at his pistol like it was a magic wand. "Keep shooting," Mitchell shouted. More Germans poured into the trench. The fighting became a brutal close-quarters melee. Pistols, knives, rifle butts, grenades thrown at point-blank range. Mitchell moved like a machine, his Colt barking again and again. Each shot dropped a man. No follow-up needed. No wounded enemies crawling forward. Just clean, immediate stops. A German officer appeared, Luger raised. He fired twice, both shots going wide in the chaos. Mitchell didn't miss. His single round caught the officer in the throat. The man collapsed. Blood sprang across the trench wall. Brennan grabbed a German stormtrooper who'd lost his weapon, slamming him against the sandbags. The man fought like a wildcat, clawing at Brennan's face. Brennan shoved his Colt against the German's ribs and fired. The muffled shot ended the struggle instantly. The assault lasted 7 minutes. When it ended, the American trench was littered with German dead. Mitchell counted quickly, 11 enemy soldiers down in his sector alone. Every single one had been stopped by a .45 caliber pistol. Some had been shot multiple times, but most had dropped from a single hit. Cole sat against the trench wall, his Colt still smoking in his hand. He'd fired all 7 rounds. 4 Germans lay dead within 10 feet of his position. "I couldn't miss," Cole said, his voice hollow. "They were so close, I couldn't miss." Mitchell reloaded, his hand steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. "That's the point, Lieutenant. The .45 was designed for this. Close, fast, brutal. At this range, accuracy is easy. Stopping power is what matters." Across the battlefield, Lieutenant Krieger was regrouping his surviving stormtroopers. The assault had failed. Worse, it had failed catastrophically. He'd lost a third of his men in minutes, and the Americans hadn't even needed their rifles for most of the fighting. "What the hell are they shooting us with?" one of his men gasped, pressing a hand to a wounded comrade's chest. The entry wound was small, but the exit wound had removed half the man's back. Krieger had seen the devastation up close. German soldiers, hardened veterans who could absorb punishment that would kill lesser men, were dropping from single pistol shots as if struck by rifle fire. It defied everything he'd learned about handgun combat. "They're pistols," another stormtrooper said, his voice shaking. "One shot, and Miller just stopped. He didn't stumble, he didn't fall, he just stopped, like someone cut his strings." Krieger stared across no man's land toward the American trenches. For the first time in his career, he felt genuine fear, not of artillery or gas or machine guns, but of a sidearm, a pistol that killed like a rifle, a weapon that turned every American officer into a close-range executioner. Back in the American trenches, word was spreading. Runners moved between positions, carrying reports of the engagement. In every sector where stormtroopers had attacked, the story was the same. American officers and NCOs armed with Colt 45s had stopped the assault cold. The casualty ratios were staggering. For every American killed, 3 Germans lay dead, most of them dropped by pistol fire. Captain William Hart, commander of the battalion's headquarters company, arrived at Mitchell's position an hour after the fighting ended. Hart was a West Point graduate, a by-the-book officer who believed in documentation and after-action reports. "Mitchell," Hart said, surveying the carnage, "I'm hearing remarkable things about your sector. They're saying you and your men stopped a stormtrooper assault with nothing but sidearms." Mitchell nodded, still cleaning his Colt. "They got inside rifle range before we knew they were coming, sir. It was pistols or bayonets. We chose pistols." Hart picked up one of the fallen German soldiers' Luger pistols. It was beautiful, precision machined, elegant, perfectly balanced. He compared it to Mitchell's Colt, blocky, utilitarian, almost crude by comparison. "Their Luger is a finer weapon," Hart said. Mitchell shook his head. "Respectfully, sir, no it's not. It's a prettier weapon, but pretty doesn't win fights at 5 yards. Stopping power does." Hart examined the German casualties more closely. Every man shot with a 45 had massive wound trauma. Exit wounds the size of fists, catastrophic internal damage, immediate incapacitation. By contrast, reports from other sectors where soldiers had used captured German pistols showed something different: wounded enemies who continued fighting even after being hit multiple times.
"The Germans don't understand yet," Mitchell said quietly. "They think pistols are backup weapons, something you use when your rifle jams. We've proven they're wrong. In trench fighting, in close quarters, the pistol is the primary weapon, and the 45 is the best pistol ever made for killing men." Hart nodded slowly. "I'm writing this up. Command needs to know what happened here today." As the afternoon wore on, the fog lifted, revealing the full scope of the battlefield. The Argonne Forest stretched endlessly, a broken wasteland of stumps, craters, and wire. Somewhere in that nightmare, German commanders were receiving reports about the failed assault, reports about American pistols that killed with one shot, reports that would fundamentally change how they thought about close-quarters combat. Mitchell sat on the fire step, cleaning his Colt for the 3rd time. Brennan joined him, offering a cigarette. "Think they'll try again?" Brennan asked. Mitchell lit the cigarette, inhaling deeply. "They'll try, but they'll think twice before they rush an American trench. Today, we taught them something." "What's that?" "That the 45 isn't a sidearm. It's a hand cannon, and in the right hands, it's more dangerous than a rifle." Cole approached, his Colt holstered, but his hand still resting on the grip. "Sir, I've been thinking. Before today, I didn't really understand why we carried these. They're heavy, the ammo is expensive, and you can't hit anything past 20 yards. Mitchell smiled grimly. "And now? Now I understand. This isn't about hitting targets at 20 yards. This is about hitting a man at 5 yards and making absolutely sure he stays down. The Germans can have their Lugers and their fancy engineering. I'll take the 45 every time." Mitchell nodded. "You're learning, Lieutenant. War isn't about the most elegant weapon. It's about the most effective one. And when a stormtrooper is charging at you with a knife, you don't need elegance. You need a bullet that will drop in before he reaches you." As evening fell, the temperature dropped. Men huddled in the trench, trying to find warmth. The smell of death hung heavy. Bodies couldn't be recovered until nightfall, and even then, it was dangerous work.
Mitchell stared at his Colt lying on a cloth beside him. 7 rounds, 7 chances to survive, 7 guaranteed stops if his aim was true. The weapon had proven itself today in the most brutal way possible against Germany's elite assault troops in the chaos of close combat where a split second meant the difference between life and death. He thought about the Moro warriors in the Philippines, the men whose unstoppable charges had led to this pistol's creation. Those tribal fighters had forced the U.S. military to confront a hard truth, that sometimes the only thing that mattered was raw stopping power. Not accuracy, not rate of fire, just the ability to put a man down with one shot, no matter what. The Colt 45 had been America's answer to that problem. And today, in the trenches of the Argonne Forest, it had proved its worth against an entirely different kind of warrior, disciplined, trained, armored stormtroopers who thought they were unstoppable. They had learned otherwise. Across no man's land, in the German trenches, Lieutenant Krieger was writing his own report. His hand trembled slightly as he described the assault, the speed, the violence, the sudden collapse of his attack, not because of machine guns or artillery, but because of American pistols that killed like rifles. Recommend, he wrote, that all units be warned about American sidearm capabilities. Enemy officers armed with large-caliber automatic pistols pose extreme danger in close combat. Single shots result in immediate incapacitation. Standard assault tactics may require modification. It was the first official German acknowledgement of what would become known in whispered conversations among stormtroopers as the American hand cannon problem. Elite assault troops who feared nothing, not gas, not flamethrowers, not bayonets, had learned to fear the distinct sound of a .45 caliber pistol being drawn from its holster. As midnight approached, Mitchell finally allowed himself to sleep. He kept his Colt within arm's reach, loaded and ready. Around him, the trench was quiet, except for the occasional cough, the rustle of a sentry shifting position, the distant pop of a flare rising over no man's land. Tomorrow would bring more fighting, more Germans, more close-quarters combat in the mud and blood of the Argonne Forest. But tonight, Mitchell and his men rested with the knowledge that they had faced Germany's best and won, not with superior numbers, not with better tactics, but with a weapon that had proven itself absolutely, brutally effective. The Colt 45 had arrived on the Western Front, and the Germans were about to learn that in the hell of trench warfare, one shot really could drop a charging soldier. The story of October 8, 1918 was just beginning to spread. But already its impact was being felt. American units were requesting more .45 ammunition. Officers who had carried their Colts as afterthoughts were practicing daily. Even enlisted men, not typically issued pistols, were trying to acquire them through unofficial channels. The age of the trench pistol had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. But the day wasn't over yet. Intelligence reports were coming in. Another German assault was being prepared, larger than the first, scheduled for dawn. The stormtroopers had been bloodied, but they weren't defeated. They would come again, and this time they would be ready for the Americans' devastating sidearms. Or so they thought.
Mitchell checked his ammunition pouches. 3 spare magazines, 21 additional rounds. Enough for 3 full reloads. Brennan was doing the same, his face grim but determined. Cole sat cleaning his pistol with an almost religious focus, understanding now that the weapon in his hands was more than steel and springs. It was the difference between life and death. "Sir," Cole said quietly, "do you think they know what's coming?" Mitchell looked toward the German lines, where shadows moved in the darkness, where stormtroopers were gathering for another assault, where officers were briefing their men and preparing for battle. "They know we have these pistols," Mitchell said, "but they don't understand yet. Not really. They think it's about the gun, but it's not. What is it about? Cole asked. Mitchell holstered his Colt, feeling its familiar weight settle against his hip. It's about what happens when a man refuses to go down, when adrenaline or drugs or sheer willpower keeps him coming even after he's been shot. That's when you learn the difference between a bullet that wounds and a bullet that stops. The Germans are about to learn that difference again. The night deepened. Somewhere in the darkness, men were preparing to kill each other. And when dawn came, the Colt 45 would speak again, its voice loud and final, writing its legend in blood and powder smoke. The second wave was coming, and this time the whole world would be watching. The sky was still black when the runners brought the news. German stormtroopers were massing for a second assault. Not just one company this time, but 3. Over 200 elite fighters, supported by flamethrower teams and heavy machine gun squads. They would hit at dawn, and this time they knew what they were facing. Captain James Mitchell stood in the command dugout, studying the hastily drawn map by candlelight. Battalion Commander Colonel Robert Hayes pointed to 3 marked positions where German forces were concentrating. "They're not underestimating us anymore," Hayes said, his voice gravelly from decades of tobacco and shouting orders. "Intelligence says they've been briefed specifically about our sidearms. They know about the 45 now. They're bringing body armor, heavier leather coats, anything to absorb pistol fire." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Body armor won't help them, sir. Not against this round." Hayes looked at the Colt holstered on Mitchell's hip. "I've read the ballistics reports, Captain. I know what that weapon can do. But I also know that confidence can kill a man just as fast as a bullet. Don't assume invincibility." "I'm not assuming anything, Colonel. I'm counting on physics. A 230-grain bullet at 850 feet per second creates over 350 foot-pounds of energy. Body armor designed to stop shrapnel or bayonets won't disperse that kind of kinetic impact. The bullet might not penetrate, but the hydrostatic shock and blunt trauma will still collapse organs and break ribs. They'll go down." Hayes studied Mitchell for a long moment. "You've become a true believer in that pistol." "No, sir. I'm a believer in mathematics. The 45 doesn't care about courage or tactics or national pride. It cares about mass times velocity, and that equation always favors us." At 0515 hours, the first German artillery barrage began. Not the massive bombardments that had characterized earlier years of the war. By late 1918, German ammunition stocks were running low. But targeted, precise fire meant to suppress specific positions. Shells screamed overhead, detonating in the American rear areas, trying to cut communications and prevent reinforcements. Mitchell moved through the trench, checking his men. Sergeant Thomas Brennan was distributing extra 45 ammunition, making sure every man with a pistol had at least 4 spare magazines. Lieutenant David Cole was helping younger soldiers check their weapons, his hands steady now, the shock of yesterday's combat replaced by grim determination. "How do you feel, Lieutenant?" Mitchell asked. Cole looked up, his face smudged with mud and powder residue. "Like I finally understand what war is, sir. Not the stories or the training, the actual thing. When that German came at me yesterday with the knife, I didn't think, I just acted. The 45 did exactly what it was supposed to do. It will today too, but there will be more of them, many more. Conserve your ammunition.
Pick your targets. Remember, one shot, one stop. Don't waste rounds on suppressive fire. Every bullet needs to count.
Further down the line, Private First Class Robert Chen, a second-generation Chinese-American from San Francisco, was teaching a replacement soldier how to properly draw and fire the M1911. Chen had killed 2 Germans yesterday with his pistol, both at ranges under 10 feet. The key is the grip, Chen explained, his accent a strange mix of Cantonese and California drawl. You don't aim like a target shooter, you point like you're pointing your finger. At this range, your body knows where the gun is aimed. Trust your instincts, and when you fire, commit to it. The .45 has recoil, but it's manageable if you're expecting it. The replacement soldier, a kid from Iowa named Daniels who looked about 17, nodded nervously, his hand shaking as he held his issued Colt. "What if I miss?" Daniels asked. Chen's expression hardened. "Then you die. But you won't miss, not at the ranges we fight at in these trenches. The Germans will be close enough to smell. Just point and shoot." At 0545 hours, the artillery stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. Every man in the trench knew what it meant. The stormtroopers were coming. Mitchell checked his Colt one final time. 7 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. 8 chances. He had 3 spare magazines, 21 additional rounds, 29 bullets total. If history repeated itself, he'd need every single one. Brennan appeared beside him, his own .45 drawn and ready. "Think they learned anything from yesterday, Captain?" "They learned we're dangerous. Whether they learned enough to survive is another question." The fog was thicker this morning, a gray curtain that reduced visibility to barely 20 yards, perfect conditions for an infiltration assault. Mitchell strained his ears, listening for the telltale sounds, the rustle of equipment, the whisper of boots on mud, the metallic click of weapons being readied. Then he heard it. A low whistle, a German signal, and suddenly the fog erupted with movement. They came from everywhere at once. German stormtroopers materialized from the mist like ghosts, dozens of them moving in coordinated teams. Grenades arced through the air, stick grenades with their distinctive wooden handles spinning end over end. Mitchell dove for cover as explosions tore through the trench, showering him with dirt and shrapnel. "Contact front!" someone screamed. Mitchell rose, pistol extended. A stormtrooper was vaulting into the trench 10 feet away. MP-18 submachine gun chattering. Mitchell fired twice. Double tap, center mass. Both rounds struck within inches of each other. The Germans' reinforced leather coat might as well have been paper. The .45 caliber bullets punched through the leather, through the metal plates sewn inside, through flesh and bone. The stormtrooper collapsed mid-stride, his MP-18 firing uselessly into the sky as he fell. To Mitchell's left, Brennan was engaged with 2 Germans simultaneously. One had a flamethrower, a terrifying weapon that could clear a trench in seconds. Brennan shot the fuel tank operator first. The man went down hard, but the flamethrower didn't explode. That was Hollywood fiction. Instead, his partner tried to aim the nozzle. Brennan's second shot caught him in the head. Both men crumpled. Cole was fighting for his life against a massive German sergeant who had closed to knife range. The German swung a trench knife in a vicious arc. Cole ducked, shoved his Colt against the man's abdomen, and fired. The point-blank shot lifted the German off his feet and threw him backward. Cole stared at his pistol in amazement. The sheer stopping power never ceased to shock those experiencing it for the first time. Private Chen found himself facing 3 stormtroopers advancing in a coordinated rush. He fired 3 times in rapid succession. 3 shots, 3 targets, 3 bodies. The .45's ability to deliver instant stops meant he could engage multiple threats without worrying about wounded enemies continuing to fight. Each man hit stayed down. The fighting intensified. More Germans poured into the American trenches, and the battle became a chaotic swirl of close-quarters violence. Mitchell emptied his first magazine, dropped it, slammed in a fresh one without breaking stride. 7 more rounds. He used 5 of them in the next 30 seconds, each bullet ending a threat.
A German officer appeared, younger than Mitchell expected, maybe 25. He was shouting orders, trying to rally his men for a concentrated push. The officer carried a Luger and fired 3 times at Brennan, all 3 shots missing in the chaos. Mitchell's single answering shot did not miss. The German officer fell silently.
Brennan reloaded, his hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the blood streaming down his face from a shrapnel wound. "They just keep coming," he shouted. "They're trying to overwhelm us with numbers," Mitchell called back. "Don't let them. Controlled fire. Make every shot count." But the Germans had learned from yesterday. Instead of charging recklessly, they were using suppressive fire and maneuver tactics. Stormtroopers with MP-18s laid down streams of 9mm fire, forcing Americans to take cover, while other teams advanced under that covering fire. It was professional, disciplined, and terrifyingly effective. Mitchell realized they were in danger of being overrun. "Fall back to secondary positions," he ordered. "Fighting withdrawal. Move!" The Americans retreated in good order, each man covering the next, pistols barking constantly. The trench system had been designed with this in mind: multiple defensive lines, each one allowing defenders to fall back while maintaining fields of fire. As they withdrew, Mitchell noticed something that confirmed his earlier assessment. Several Germans who'd been shot were still lying where they'd fallen, but they were moving, wounded, yes, but not dead. Mitchell had seen enough combat to recognize fatal wounds versus survivable ones. The stormtroopers wearing body armor had been hit, knocked down by the massive kinetic energy of .45 caliber rounds, but some had survived the impacts. "Aim for the head," he shouted. "If they're armored, go for headshots." It was a harder target, especially in the chaos of close combat, but American marksmanship training was superior to German. At ranges of 5 to 15 feet, headshots were achievable for trained soldiers. The Americans adjusted their tactics immediately. Colt shot a charging stormtrooper in the face. The man's head snapped back, and he fell like a puppet with cut strings. Brennan put 2 rounds through the neck of another German trying to throw a grenade. Chen, demonstrating the precision that came from years of hunting in the California mountains, methodically shot 3 Germans in rapid succession: forehead, temple, jaw. All 3 dropped instantly. The German assault began to falter. Despite their numbers, despite their training, despite their preparation, the mathematics of the engagement were brutal. The .45 was simply too effective at the ranges where trench fighting occurred. Even when body armor prevented penetration, the blunt force trauma was incapacitating. And when Americans adjusted to headshots, even that advantage disappeared. Lieutenant Hans Krieger, commanding the German assault, watched his attack disintegrate. He'd started with over 200 men. In 15 minutes of fighting, he'd lost at least 60, with more wounded. The Americans were falling back, yes, but in good order, and they were exacting a terrible price for every foot of trench. "They're not human," one of his surviving sergeants gasped, pressing a hand to his bruised ribs where a .45 round had struck his body armor. "I've been shot before, Herr Lieutenant. Rifle rounds, pistol rounds. I've never felt anything like this. It was like being hit with a sledgehammer. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. If he'd shot me again, the armor wouldn't have mattered. My ribs would have punched through my lungs." Krieger looked at the shattered remnants of his elite assault force. These were Germany's best, veterans of a dozen major battles, men who had broken through French and British lines that were supposed to be impregnable, and they were being systematically destroyed by American pistol fire. "Sound the withdrawal," Krieger ordered, the words tasting like poison. "But, Herr Lieutenant, now, before we lose everyone." The German attack broke. Stormtroopers began pulling back, dragging wounded comrades, leaving their dead behind. The Americans didn't pursue. They held their positions, conserved their ammunition, and let the enemy go. Mitchell watched them retreat through the thinning fog. His Colt was empty. He'd fired all 29 rounds. Around him, his men were checking weapons, treating wounded, and counting losses. The trench floor was slick with blood, both American and German. "Casualty report?" Mitchell called. Brennan, his head now bandaged, consulted with the squad leaders. 8 dead, sir. 19 wounded, 6 seriously. But we held.
And the Germans, he gestured at the bodies littering the trench in no man's land. They left at least 80 dead and probably that many wounded. Cole appeared, his uniform torn and bloody, but he was grinning fiercely. "Sir, I used every round, every single one. 19 shots fired. I counted, and I'm pretty sure I got at least 14 confirmed." "You did well, Lieutenant. All of you did." Private Chen was helping carry a wounded soldier to the aid station. He paused to report, "Captain, my position accounted for 11 enemy. The 45 performed flawlessly. No jams, no failures. At one point, I was shooting so fast, the barrel was too hot to touch, but it kept cycling." Mitchell nodded, feeling the weight of command settling on his shoulders. They'd won again. The .45 had proven itself again. But the cost was real, measured in American blood and German dead. Colonel Hayes appeared, moving through the trench with the battalion medical officer. His expression was grave but satisfied. "Captain Mitchell, hell of a fight. The entire line held. German assault repulsed with heavy casualties." "Yes, sir. But they'll try again. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they'll try." Hayes shook his head. "No, they won't. I've just received word from intelligence. The German High Command has issued new directives to all stormtrooper units. They're to avoid close-quarters engagements with American forces whenever possible. Direct quote from the intercepted order. American pistol superiority in confined spaces presents unacceptable casualty risk. You've done something remarkable here, Captain. You've made the German army afraid of a sidearm." Mitchell looked at his Colt, still warm from firing. "It's not about making them afraid, sir. It's about making them respect the realities of physics and engineering. The .45 ACP round was designed to stop charging men. It does that job better than any other pistol cartridge ever created. The Germans thought pistols were secondary weapons. We've proven they're wrong." Over the next 3 days, the pattern repeated across the Argonne Forest. German stormtrooper attacks were met by American defenders armed with Colt .45s, and each time the results were the same: devastating German casualties, minimal American losses in close quarters. Word spread through both armies like wildfire. American morale soared. Enlisted men who had been terrified of German stormtroopers now spoke of them with contempt. "Let them come," became the common refrain. "We've got .45s." Officers who had carried their pistols as afterthoughts now trained with them daily, understanding that in the brutal close-quarters fighting of the Western Front's final months, the M1911 was often more valuable than a rifle. German morale suffered correspondingly. Stormtrooper units, the elite of the German army, began requesting transfers to sectors not facing American forces. Reports filtered back of entire squads refusing to enter trenches where Americans were known to be dug in. The psychological impact was devastating. On October 12th, Captain William Hart, the officer who had inspected the first battle, compiled an after-action report that would become famous in military history. Titled, "The Efficacy of the M1911 Pistol in Close-Quarters Combat, Lessons from the Argonne Forest," it detailed every engagement, every casualty, every technical aspect of what had occurred. The report's conclusion was stark. The M1911 pistol, chambered in .45 ACP, has proven to be the most effective close-quarters combat weapon deployed by any army in this war. Its stopping power is absolute, its reliability is unmatched, and its psychological effect on enemy forces cannot be overstated. Recommendation: immediate increase in production and distribution of M1911 pistols and .45 ACP ammunition to all American forces. Mitchell read the report in the command dugout, Brennan looking over his shoulder. "They're calling it a revolution in small arms," Brennan said. "Papers back home are starting to write about the pistol that stopped the German army." Mitchell set down the report, uncomfortable with the grandeur of the language. "It's not the pistol, Sergeant. It's the men who carry it. The .45 is a tool, an excellent tool, yes, but tools don't win wars. Soldiers do." "True enough, sir, but having the right tool doesn't hurt." Cole entered,
now sporting a bandage on his left arm from a shrapnel wound received in a subsequent skirmish. "Sir, thought you'd want to know. The Germans just sent a truce party. They want to recover their dead from October 8th and 9th. Mitchell stood, buckling on his gun belt. "Let's go meet them." At the designated neutral point, a shattered farmhouse halfway between the lines, Mitchell met Lieutenant Krieger for the first time. The German officer was tall, scarred, exhausted. His eyes held the 1,000-yard stare common to men who had seen too much. "Captain," Krieger said, in accented but perfect English, "thank you for agreeing to this. War doesn't mean we stop being civilized. Your men fought bravely. They deserve proper burial." Krieger nodded slowly. Then, surprisingly, he gestured at Mitchell's holstered Colt. "May I see it, the weapon that has caused us so much trouble?" Mitchell hesitated, then drew the pistol. He removed the magazine, cleared the chamber, and handed it to Krieger. The German officer examined it with professional interest. So simple, so brutal. No elegance, just function. He hefted it, feeling the weight. Heavy, much heavier than our Luger.
"That weight is part of what makes it work," Mitchell explained. "The heavy slide absorbs recoil. The heavy bullet delivers maximum energy to the target. Everything about this weapon is optimized for one purpose: stopping a man immediately. It succeeds admirably at that purpose." Krieger handed the pistol back. "I have lost good men to this weapon, Captain. Men I trained with, fought beside, respected. They were brave, they were skilled, and your pistol killed them as easily as if they were children." Mitchell holstered the Colt. "My condolences for your losses, Lieutenant. I take no pleasure in any of this." "I know. I can see it in your eyes. You are a soldier, not a murderer. But I must tell you something." Krieger paused, choosing his words carefully. "The German army is issuing new standing orders. Stormtroopers are no longer to engage American forces in close quarters unless absolutely necessary. We are to use artillery, machine guns, gas, anything that allows us to fight at distance. Because at close range, against men with these pistols," he gestured at Mitchell's holster, "we cannot win. This is the first time in this war that German assault infantry has been ordered to avoid combat. We who have broken the French at Verdun, who shattered the Italians at Caporetto, who have assaulted fortifications across Europe, we have been ordered to avoid American trenches because of a pistol." The two officers stood in silence for a moment, the weight of those words hanging between them. "The war is ending, Lieutenant," Mitchell said finally. "Whether in weeks or months, it's ending. Perhaps these new orders will save lives on both sides. Perhaps. Or perhaps it simply delays the inevitable." Krieger saluted formally. "Thank you for the courtesy of this meeting, Captain. I hope we do not meet again under less civilized circumstances." "As do I, Lieutenant." Mitchell returned to American lines, his thoughts troubled. There was no glory in what had happened, no triumph in the innovation of killing more efficiently. The .45 was a marvel of engineering, yes. It had saved American lives, yes, but it had also taken German lives with a terrible efficiency that left him feeling hollow. That evening, he sat with Brennan and Cole, sharing a bottle of cognac, liberated from an abandoned French farmhouse. The three men drank in silence, watching the sunset over the ruined forest. The following weeks were a blur of demobilization, paperwork, and preparation for the journey home. The M1911 Colt 45s were collected, inventoried, and shipped back to American armories. Some men tried to keep theirs as souvenirs, but regulations were strict. Mitchell surrendered his pistol, serial number 104557, on November 28, 1918. He'd carried it for 16 months. It had saved his life at least a dozen times.
He'd fired approximately 300 rounds through it in combat. It had never jammed, never failed, never let him down. "It's just a gun," he told himself as he handed it to the supply sergeant. But he didn't quite believe that. In the decades that followed, the legend of the Colt 45 only grew. It became standard issue for all American military forces. It served in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and dozens of smaller conflicts. Soldiers trusted it, relied on it, loved it in the way that men love tools that keep them alive. Military historians would analyze the Argonne Forest engagements for years. They would write papers about the psychological impact of superior stopping power. They would calculate optimal pistol cartridge specifications. They would debate whether the 45 ACP was truly superior to other designs or whether American victory had been due to superior training, tactics, and industrial capacity. But for the men who had been there, who had stood in muddy trenches while German stormtroopers charged out of the fog, there was no debate. They knew what the 45 had meant to them. It had been the weapon that turned the tide when battles came down to yards and seconds. It had been the last line of defense when rifles were too long and bayonets too slow. It had been the difference between life and death. Captain James Mitchell returned to America in January 1919. He was decorated, promoted, and offered a position training the next generation of American officers. He accepted, and for the next 20 years, he taught young soldiers about tactics, leadership, and the realities of combat. He always spent one full day on pistol training, and he always told his students the same thing. A pistol is not a toy. It's not a symbol of rank or authority. It's a weapon designed to stop a threat immediately at close range. If you ever need it, you need it to work absolutely. The 45 works absolutely. Learn to use it properly, and it might save your life someday. Some students dismissed the lesson as antiquated. After all, modern warfare was about tanks, aircraft, and artillery, not pistol duels in trenches. But others listened, learned, and when they found themselves in desperate situations years later, they remembered Mitchell's words. The 45 had been proven in the mud and blood of the Argonne Forest. It had faced Germany's elite and prevailed, and in doing so, it had written a chapter in military history that would never be forgotten. On October 8, 1918, the Colt 45 had arrived on the battlefield not as a secondary weapon, but as a primary instrument of survival. And Germany had learned through bitter experience that one shot really could drop a charging soldier. That lesson echoed through the decades, a reminder that sometimes the simplest solution, a heavy bullet fired from a reliable gun, was also the most effective. The pistol itself was just steel and springs and machined parts. But in the hands of American soldiers who understood its capabilities and trusted its design, it had become something more. It had become legend.